Mom, diver, and marine professor Siobhan Gray stumbled across something that had been lost for years during a routine diving expedition with her marine ecology team. One fateful morning, Siobhan's team from the Marine Ecology Department at Simon Fraser University in Canada was conducting a research dive to study the waters off the coast of Bamfield, near Vancouver Island's west coast. Siobhan and her team had begun their day with a very specific goal in mind, but the purpose of their dive was about to abruptly change. Siobhan was swimming through the crystal-clear ocean when she noticed something on the seafloor. It didn't look like it was part of the natural ecosystem. It had hard edges and a leather strap that was waving in the current. Intrigued, she swam down towards it. She examined it further and then lifted it out of the sand. It was a camera. It looked very old. She had no idea how long it must have been resting there or why, but she would find out soon. Once all the divers from Siobhan's team returned to the boat, she revealed what she found. Everyone gathered around to look at the find, but unlike Siobhan, they weren't much interested. However, Siobhan knew there was more to this camera than meets the eye. She decided to take it back to her lab for further investigation, unaware that she had taken the first step towards a shocking revelation. When Siobhan opened up the camera, she was fascinated by the miniature ecosystem that was living on and inside it. Siobhan then turned her attention toward the thing she had been wondering about all day, the camera's memory card. Amazingly, it was still relatively intact. My first thought about the camera was, are there still images on the card? Siobhan carefully cleaned the memory card with an earbud and rubbing alcohol. Then she slotted it into her computer. It worked. Not only was the 8GB Lexer Platinum card still working, but it still contained many videos and photos. Siobhan was relieved. As she looked through these personal and secret memories one by one, she was beginning to feel like she was prying, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. And then she noticed something. The photos and videos were of various people at many different get-togethers, dating back as far as 2012. As exciting as it was, looking at the photos just didn't feel right somehow. However, she decided that if she wanted to find the owner, she'd need to look at these photos. It was then, when she was trying to put the pieces together, there was one man who kept reappearing. He kept reappearing as she had reached the end. She knew she needed to look for this man, but she had no idea where to begin. How was she going to do this? Siobhan decided that the best chance she had of finding this man was to take her search to social media. She began to tweet out some of the photos using the #detectives, unaware of the impending consequences. Soon the photos had garnered hundreds of comments and retweets. Then she decided to try a different tactic. Siobhan wasn't getting any closer to locating the camera's owner on Twitter, so she resorted to printing out the photos and posting them around the coastal town and area where the camera was found. It was after Siobhan had stuck the poster up in a local cafe that she first felt like someone was watching her. As she walked from the cafe across the road to another wooden pole to stick another poster up, she heard the quick shuffling of boots. She turned around to see a man following her, and not just any man, he was a Navy SEAL. He was tall and very serious looking. As he got closer, he looked at her inquisitively. She looked at him the same. He said, "Are you one looking for this man?" Siobhan told him that she was. "You don't know?" he asked. The man she was looking for was Paul Burgoyne, an artist from Vancouver. The Navy man explained to Siobhan how his wife had been looking for him. He had gone out on a fishing trip and never returned until the Navy found him. But the reason for his disappearance is still unknown. This piece of information only made Siobhan more intrigued, so she kept digging. One morning in 2014, 2 years later, Siobhan got a phone call that finally put an end to the mysterious missing case of Paul Burgoyne. The Navy officer had eventually tracked down his phone number in an attempt to get further information about his whereabouts. She answered the private number, oblivious to who she was about to speak to. Paul Burgoyne was on the other end, and he was thrilled, she explained. He says when he got off the phone with the Coast Guard, he and his wife were laughing a great deal and mentioned how lucky he was. But it was only when Siobhan heard his harrowing tale that she understood what happened to him and why the Navy was involved. It turned out that Paul was an extremely lucky man. He told Siobhan the story of how he had lost his camera. On July 20, 2012, Paul was sailing to his summer home in Tassos, British Columbia. His trip had gone without a hitch until he ran into a spot of bad weather. With the sea growing turbulent, his boat was thrown against some rocks. He subsequently lost his camera in the wreck. When Paul's boat crashed against the rocks, they smashed his hull apart. Paul found himself stranded in the freezing cold water and developed hypothermia. It was lucky that patrons at a nearby inn spotted him and called the Coast Guard. But it was only 6 hours later that he was rescued and brought back to shore. Paul was thankful that he had made it out alive, but he had lost hundreds of personal possessions in the wreck. He was most heartbroken about his camera. But after he had gotten the call from the Navy officer informing him that his camera had been found, he couldn't believe his luck. Siobhan was very careful to back up the contents of the SD card before they handed it over to the officer. "That card seems to be a little unlucky," she laughed. The old man was so happy to have some of his old memories back. His wife was happy as he seemed to get his life back. He thanked her, and hearing that Paul was well on his way to getting his old personality back made Siobhan happy. But something stung inside her heart. Her mouth went dry, and she swallowed. She remembered that she still had all his photographs from the camera on her personal laptop. Siobhan grew a conscience. The photographs were not her property. She had no right to even look at them without Paul's permission. So why did she still keep them on her laptop? The weary diver mom sat down at her table and looked at her laptop. She was contemplating whether to look at the pictures or not. It was the curious explorer in her. She tapped on the laptop with her nail, thinking, questioning, "Perhaps one last look before I delete them." She thought and opened the laptop. The laptop was on, and a file folder was saved on her desktop. Bamfield Camera Find. Siobhan moved her mouse over the file and clicked open. She was in. The first pictures were of family, then holidays, sea dives, underwater pictures, and lastly, the ash scattering ceremony for his late mother. A row of pictures seemed to catch Siobhan's eye. They were all blue. She opened the first image. It was an underwater picture of a beautiful coral reef. Siobhan immediately recognized it and thought there was a connection. She had dived there hundreds of times. He had been diving in one of her favorite spots. This was a conservation area that was preserved. One had to get special diving permission to access those waters. Was Paul a professional diver and a Navy SEAL? This specific area was on the west coast of Vancouver. The reason it was protected was because of a legal case pending against a giant corporation for illegal dumping and mining. As Siobhan was one of the top marine professors in her area, she was approached to assist in the case against Big Pharma. Her duty was to study marine and coral life and to monitor any negative impact on their environment. The legal case has been going on for the past 3 years now. The court could not come to a conclusion due to a lack of evidence. The passionate marine professor knew that she had hit the mark. She scrolled through the pictures. There were hundreds of underwater photographs all in a row when she saw it. It was a large blue container, a chemical drum the type you use for toxic waste dumping. Siobhan zoomed into a few photos, and there it was. One picture had a red tape with the company logo all over it. Gotcha! It had been a busy past few years because of this case. Now she finally had evidence to back up her theories from all this time. The hard part was done, but she still had to put all this information together and present it in court. She needed more backup and decided to call Paul. "I'm sure he will understand," she thought. Siobhan called Paul and explained what happened. Paul told her that he had run into some trouble with the big pharma company, which is why he had to lay low for a while. He said he thought someone was after him trying to kill him. Paul agreed to help her in court. He would be a witness and would get the Navy to back up his story. The environmental team also helped Siobhan gather more recent information to help her case. She was confident that she could take on the law with facts and integrity. These criminals would not walk away scot-free. They would pay for damaging her beautiful marina.